Another really important reason to have some conversation about so-called mania and psychosis is that so often mania and psychosis is a type of monologue. And I came across that statement. It was by Dr. Daniel Fisher. And basically he was saying that psychosis is a monologue. And what it seems like he means by that is that it's just a conversation with oneself. So right now I'm having a conversation with myself, so it's kind of like psychosis. But the psychosis is a conversation with oneself, and then in that way one is sort of lost and isolated in one's own internal reality and not relating to the external reality, really, especially in terms of people. And so by having conversation about this when we're not in those extreme states, we're at least having a dialogue about some of the things that were monologues. And by having a dialogue about them, it makes them into a dialogue. And even though it's not during the actual process, which it can't be at this point because, the process is over, I feel like by having dialogue by all these elements that were monologue, it can perhaps even change the future possibility of having these monologue states, in that some of the elements that came about as monologues were now changed into dialogues. And I'm thinking that's a little bit different, and I'm thinking this now just as I'm talking about it, because there is an open dialogue approach to psychosis that was developed in Finland. And they use it in Finland for people who have their first psychosis that is suspected to be schizophrenia. And there's a team of people that go out to the person that's having the crisis, and they speak with the person in crisis, they speak with all the important people in the person's life at the same time, and they speak openly. And they do this a number of times. I don't know the details, I'm just speaking from what I know here, or from what I can remember. And they never speak about the person with the crisis behind their back. So even if the two people that came to help, the people trained, have something to say about the person that's having the crisis, they don't say, okay, we're going to leave the room and talk about you. They say it openly. Even if it doesn't matter what it is, they'll say it. They'll talk to each other in front of everybody. And in this way, everyone is openly speaking about this, because the theory in that approach is something along the lines of psychosis occurs in an individual because of a breakdown in their social fabric of some kind. And that is congruent with the monologue thing, because basically a person, maybe they're talking to their mom, they're talking to their dad, they're talking to their friends, and then all of a sudden they're in a monologue. Not all of a sudden, but at some point, if they've developed, psychosis, they're in a monologue with themselves in their own reality, and, maybe experiencing things internally that aren't really congruent with reality. So they've lost the dialogue with people in their circle. And maybe even if they did try to have any kind of conversation, it would just seem unreasonable. And then at that point, somebody would say, hey, this person's not doing well. They're in some kind of psychosis. So I'm wondering, that's a great approach, the open dialogue approach. And I feel that would be wonderful if more people were trained in open dialogue. And I'm wondering if having open dialogue with each other after the fact, even though maybe that psychosis is over, would actually prevent some psychosis, in that, you know, it wouldn't be really seen as psychosis. It would just be talking about those kinds of experiences, and it would almost give us a heads up and a warning if it was starting to come about again, and we could just openly dialogue about it without needing all these professionals with open dialogue, and we'd be able to perhaps talk each other back into consensus reality. And the thing too that I'm wondering about with this is that the open dialogue approach sounds wonderful. It sounds awesome. But basically, it's assuming there's this person with psychosis and then all their loved people in their life, and this person has the psychosis and they're ill. And then by having open dialogue, the person eventually isn't so ill because now they're reintegrated into society or something like that. I don't know for sure. But what I'm wondering is, sometimes a person in mania and psychosis actually has some good ideas that if they were implemented in reality in some way, or at least talked about, perhaps reality would level up. So I'm wondering, in this almost like reverse open dialogue approach that I'm talking about, which isn't open dialogue approach at all, it's just me saying, let's start sharing with each other about stuff. But if we're sharing from the vantage point of, this is what happened, now I'm, you know, doing pretty well, and let's talk about our experiences and create sort of a meshwork of experience that is like a foundation. We can talk reality up a level, and we can also help talk each other back to some kind of reality when, if somebody does go into a state of being in a monologue. But if we each have our little monologues and we start sharing and it becomes one big dialogue, all of a sudden some of those things we're talking about can start to become a reality. Maybe not like the very particular personal experiences, but if we're having all this conversation and all of a sudden there's a lot of theme of, there's 1,000 people in the conversation and 100 people want to help homelessness and they had these great ideas, and 100 people want to help the forest and they had these great ideas, and look, 100 people want to help children that are in poverty and they had these great ideas. Well, now all of a sudden some of this monologue actually turns into dialogue that is actually quite healthy and enriching. So maybe there was some pathological parts, and we could think, well, let's avoid going into monologue over that, but let's continue to dialogue and protect ourselves through the dialogue from these more non-fruitful states and experiences, and then the ones that are fruitful, perhaps collectively we can actually do something. And since mania and psychosis is like a hyper infused meaningful state, if all of a sudden through these talks and conversations meaningful action was implemented through it, now do we really need these hyper meaningful states anymore if we've now created something in reality that's very meaningful to us? Maybe not so much, because to me it seems like these states have hyper meaning, and meaning is all internal, and perhaps we want to actually make life meaningful on the external, and oftentimes after a diagnosis that's very hard to do, but I also feel like a lot of this energy of mania and psychosis isn't actually for personal gain. It's not a state of personal gain. It feels very personally wonderful, but I feel like that best self is actually for the betterment of the world. And so if each person in that goes through that, or some people feel like now, I have something I want to give back to the world. Well, it can be more powerful if we do that together, because I feel actually that there's like a collective vision that we're trying to manifest, but if we don't collectively talk about it, we're never really going to figure it out. And then we'll just have to keep popping into this isolated monologue meaningful state, and then we try to get the meaning out of it. But I think different people actually have different pieces of the puzzle of this meaningful whatever that we're seeing. And it's not seeing as in, oh, it's there, it's over there, like, why doesn't anyone see it? We're seeing it inside of ourselves, and perhaps each one of us is a piece of the puzzle, and we each have something inside of ourselves to bring out in that. We each have a piece of the vision, or we each, we are each a piece of the vision, in that most of us have eyes that work, and we see, and whatever we see is sort of what is created, and most of us are just seeing the same thing all the time and going about daily reality. But certain people enter that inner visionary meaningful state, and they see these things that could be. They see possibilities, they see something new, and it's pretty difficult for one person who sees that to do it all. And I think that would defeat the purpose of some of what that energy is trying to show us, which is we're all one. So if we're all one, why are we not collaborating and working together? So I actually feel like we need to really start talking about that too, because maybe that's part of the point, is to get us to start talking to each other about this. A lot of people there's a lot of conversations going on in the world, but talking about one's inner subjective experiences of extreme states of consciousness that were diagnosed as mental illnesses, and what that could mean for the betterment of the world, is a small conversation in the world. But it probably needs to get bigger. Like I do have a book called The Spiritual Gift of Madness, and it's actually a really, really, really good book. But it's quite wordy, and I can't imagine that many people that have gone through this experience and perhaps are now medicated and perhaps struggling, and the trouble is, a person will go from this meaning, and I want to save the world, and I want to change the world, and I want to help people, to medicated, stigmatized, and barely surviving. And then it's like people get lost, and so many people have trouble even getting out of just being able to survive and getting past that. And people that are just stuck in survival, it's going to be pretty difficult to thrive. And I'm in that situation myself. So in that way, by at least having conversation, like, we don't have to make promises. We don't have to do anything in particular. It's just starting to have conversation about it. And, even a person that perhaps is not doing the greatest and on a bunch of medication can still say, hey, I had this experience when I was in this state, and yeah, it's congruent with what you're talking about this, or what they said about that, and just really, uplifting each other a little bit. It's one thing for the system to say, oh yeah, you can recover. Recovery is expected. Yay. Meanwhile, hearing that from somebody who's never gone through it and doesn't know the agony and the terror and the suffering, it's like, who are they to say that? How do they know? Where's the proof? Show me somebody. And it almost feels like you have no right to say that, because you don't know. It's nice, like positive thinking and encouragement. And I believe I was told that 5 years ago. but I'm not thriving, you know? I'm technically still in survival. And I'd like to have these conversations to invite a mindset of thriving. And I feel like I can't really thrive in isolation. I feel like I'm meant to thrive with everyone else, with the rest of you. That, you know, in old tribes, they would depend on each other for survival. Well, perhaps we need each other to start to thrive and to start to create the context for thriving, even though the actual structures don't exist. And, you know, I feel like we can thrive. I feel like we've had a lot of great ideas, and maybe so many of us have had the same ideas, and it's difficult to maybe manifest and create some of those ideas when in isolation by oneself. Like, are each one of us supposed to become our own separate little expert in isolation, trying to do what we can do, or do we get together in conversation and see what we can put together? And, you know, this is for, like, making the world better. You know, that's kind of what we want. That's why we went into these states of feeling like everything was meaningful. Well, we have the meaning within us, and it's still in there, and it's never been harvested, so it's still kind of dormant. So it's kind of no wonder that, you know, there's quote-unquote relapse, because we didn't get the message. And even if we did get the message, we forgot to tell each other. We forgot to talk about it. And it takes quite a bit of conversation for something to actually take root in the fabric of reality. And, you know, we've had all these experiences that are not grounded in the fabric of reality. But it doesn't mean none of them are meant to become actualities. It just means that we don't have any kind of structure for communicating and infrastructure for actually manifesting some of these visions and dreams. And a lot of the visions and dreams, they're so big that no one person could ever do it. So even in that, when you think about it, if you had a big vision or dream, that assumes you need other people's help. Because you can't, like, if you saw this big new invention, likely you can't actually build it by yourself. Or if you saw this big, beautiful new healing retreat, or maybe something bigger, you can't do that by yourself. So we need to start talking to each other about this. And just as friends, you know, like, talk to each other as friends if we've experienced this. And then if you start to get some ideas and stuff together, you know, create some kind of business or whatever for profit or whatever you want. But the initial part of talking to each other, to the different visionaries, you know, don't say, oh, I want your money or something. Like, we need to help each other. And maybe in doing that, we'll be able to create some great things that, you know, could be up there in terms of how it benefits society. And society often rewards things that are highly beneficial to society. So, yeah, we need to help each other, and we need to help the world. You know, maybe you felt that for a day, maybe you felt that for a month, maybe you felt that for a year, maybe you don't feel it now, but it doesn't mean it's not true. It just means you don't feel it as much. But if you have the information inside on, you know, what you wanted to do or how you were going to go about it, Even if you can't write it out on paper right now, or even if you can't, put it in a logical sequence. I can't put things in logical sequence. Let's just have conversation with each other. And even if we have these conversations and we start harvesting some ideas, maybe we'd have some kind of idea bank of some kind, and all of a sudden people are coming to us like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What are your ideas on this? Do you have any ideas related to this? Like, we have a lot of good stuff. And that's the thing when I was talking before about different abilities, is that we have different abilities. We have ideas. We have visions. Maybe we don't have the capability and capacity to carry a lot of them out, but we have those visions and we have some ideas, and maybe we have some capacity to carry it out, or however it fits. But we have to start creating some of these resources that we are able to, like, we are a resource of ideas. We are a resource of capacity. And I think it was Robert Anton Wilson who said the biggest resource on the planet is the human brain. And we got brains with ideas that we've probably written down somewhere. We probably have lists, and we could probably create like a huge vault of ideas, or even just share ideas by video, and then share ideas that would help the world. Maybe we need our own talk, like there's TED Talks. Maybe we need head talks, for people that have had visions, not just for people who have these carefully crafted ideas that come from their 10 years of research. We have ideas that are better than people's ideas from 10 years of research that we get in 1 second. So ideas don't come from combining old bits of data and finding like a new insight after 10 years. They can come from a different source. And it was actually David Bohm who said that we need a new source of ideas. Something like that. It's in his interview with Dr. David Suzuki. He said we need a new source of ideas. And Albert Einstein said we're not going to solve today's current problems by the same level of thinking that created them. And in my mind, the ideas that come out of manic consciousness are not from the same level of thinking as the problems and the creation of those problems that we face now in the world. So in that way, I actually feel like some of those ideas are needed for the world, and they're actually there because they're needed, and it's actually supposed to be utilized because it's happening through people. Like, where else are these ideas going to come from? They're going to come through people. And they don't necessarily come from somebody's old linear thought process or recombining of old ideas. That's what Albert Einstein's saying, is that the solution's not going to come from that level of thinking and that way of creating ideas, like David Bohm says. It has to come from somewhere else. And so these geniuses are alluding to the fact of the process of mania, and it's kind of the solution in a way. And that's what the book, The Spiritual Gift of Madness, talks about, is that, some of these, mad gifts, as they say in the book, are really needed for the transformation of the world. And, I think that through the process that's happening now, we're turned into sort of impotent visionaries. We each have our little visions and ideas and notebooks in isolation. But after being diagnosed with a mental illness, nobody's going to listen. But if we actually were to combine stuff and talk to each other, like internal scientists, like people have access to the science of inner insight, and those ideas that come, not everything is a great idea, but there is a lot of really good ones, I'm sure. And I'm just wondering how we could go about sharing them and having conversation, and maybe through conversation 2 or 3 people would meet that had a very similar vision that they would want to work on in terms of something new, a new innovation. And there's so much now with crowdfunding and social media that something really good could get off the ground, but we need to start talking to each other and meeting each other in order to do that. Otherwise, I feel like our ideas and our insights, since they're not personal, they kind of come from, consciousness. We almost need another consciousness to help us with it, because it's almost like the ones that combine properly with the right people will get created. So it's almost like a lock and a key. It's like, well, will this happen? And we need actually more people in the world that are combining in that way to create meaningful and amazing, innovative things with those insights that come from that other level. Because there's so many people out there that are doing so many projects and creations from the level of thought that's actually just creating more problems. Like, it might be solving one problem, but it creates 3 other problems because it's from that same level. And those are the people, with the money, and they're well-meaning people doing things that do provide some benefit. But perhaps if we were able to get together and find some commonalities, then we would be able to create some things that really help. And maybe we need a lot of us in order to do that, just because, like, how many of us can really work that hard all the time? Maybe some of us. Maybe we each just contribute a really small part. And, instead of one person doing so much, maybe each person has a little part of it. And then there was this other quote I was thinking of. It's, oh yeah. So this is to do with, this is again to do sort of with the theme that this manic energy is evolutionary in some way. So this is a Buckminster Fuller quote, and he's an insane genius, meaning crazy genius. Not meaning crazy, but meaning, see how these words insane and crazy are actually, they have good connotations most of the time. Like, wow, that's insane. That's awesome. I prefer those connotations. Like, that's crazy, yeah. So he has a quote about, he's talking about specialization and how it's the enemy of synergy. So I guess that makes me realize that what I'm talking about when I'm saying we need to start conversation and sharing and just conversation is synergy, is what Buckminster Fuller's talking about, because it's not about anybody being the expert. It's not about specialization, like I specialize in this and I'm a professional in that. But he talks about how, he says specialization is the enemy of synergy. And he proposes, Buckminster Fuller proposes a reframing of culture that could get all of humanity to educate itself swiftly enough to generate spontaneous social behaviors that will avoid extinction. So he said it's really important to be curious and to have generalist knowledge. So think about having generalist knowledge of mania and psychosis, and not about mania and psychosis, but about, it's one thing to be like, oh, this is what mania and psychosis mean because this is what happened. But the other level is, I was in this altered state and I had these visions and I have these ideas and I have these gifts and I have these inventions and I have these whatever. So it's one thing to talk about it in terms of a baseline to have that dialogue and conversation so we don't feel like we're super crazy, because a lot of other people have experienced weird stuff. But in and amongst the weird stuff is the gifts and the amazing stuff and the ideas and the changes in attitude and perspective and outlook. But basically, I love this part that Fuller says about to get all of humanity to educate itself swiftly enough to generate spontaneous social behaviors that will avoid extinction. To me, that sounds like mania. Spontaneous social behaviors that will avoid extinction? Hello, people in mania like give away money, they become super altruistic, they want to save the world, they take homeless people home to have a shower. Those are spontaneous social behaviors. And most of them are in line with avoiding extinction, I would say. Like they're in line with life-affirming things. So to me, synergy, we need to create synergetic conversations between people who have had ideas, visions, and gifts in extreme states of consciousness. And then, so I think, I think that quote relates. I think those quotes relate to I think those quotes relate to what I'm talking about. So yeah, synergetic conversations. It's not about motive. It's not about this is what we have to do. It's just starting to have those conversations. And, you know, I feel like mania has given us some of those spontaneous social behaviors. It's like a taste of it. And we were in that really wonderful place where we had that extra energy to share. And now it's about harvesting some of the meaning from those experiences in order to create actual innovations in reality that give us meaning and bring meaning to our life, because those are some of the things that we saw were actually meaningful. So we saw what was meaningful, so now it's about creating what was meaningful. And maybe in that way we'll start to create a meaningful world again. People are discontented. It's almost up to us to create this more meaningful world for people to start to take their place in this new meaningful world. You know, you could imagine that before there were so many factory workers, but with automation there's not so many needed anymore. Well, where do these people go? Well, there's new jobs created. Well, perhaps with our synergetic conversations we can create innovations. And we can also create meaning. We can create meaningful positions for people in this world. As, you know, we're really lacking that. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why it's often so hard for people that have gone through these crises to, you know, reintegrate into society, is that, you know, society is so meaningless and it's very difficult to just pop oneself back in there. It doesn't give any energy, and a person lacks energy through being medicated, and then to have no energy in terms of going back to something really meaningless is not inspiring. And that's not the whole story around people and why they are having a hard time functioning in society. It's complex. But you know, a person that has had visions can participate in a meaningful way just by getting involved in the conversation and sharing what they have experienced and what they know and what they want to share. And, you know, we really have to assume that all of this meaningful stuff that we experienced in those states is common property. It's really like, I don't own this. This is for the world. This is for reality. And, you know, there's no real ownership there. I think actually that's one of the things that kills the buzz, is we mistakenly take ownership for how amazing it is, and like, oh, I'm so amazing. You know, it's like there's this amazing, meaningful stuff coming through. That's for the world. And, you know, often most of us start to identify with, I'm so great. And, you know, I am it. You know, I did it too. And, you know, as soon as it was like, I'm it, it's like, you're it? Okay, I'll show you something that you're it. And I was in hell, and I was hell. And so, you know, I'm all of that, and I'm none of that. And sometimes I'm this, and sometimes I'm that. But I can't supremely identify with, I am the ultimate only. Like, obviously not. We all share that, the ultimate. We all share that ultimate. And to me, it's not about me and my personal ultimate experience. I did have that once. But that's actually not what it's about. It's about, okay, now I'm back in consensus reality. And it's about all of us getting there to that ultimate together. Because there's no point in me being there by myself. You know, I'd be there for a certain period of time, and then it wouldn't really feel like that anymore. It wouldn't feel great forever. If it felt great forever, I wouldn't know that it was feeling great anymore, because I'd have nothing to compare it to. So through psychosis after the mania, I sure as heck had something to compare it to. I had the opposite end of the spectrum. But what I'm saying is, the meaning and the wonderfulness and the gifts that come out of that are for humanity. It's like, who am I for the world? Not who am I for myself only. And, you know, it could be the same thing. But I think the universe is really inviting us to share and collaborate. And it's almost like if we start to do that and we start to really work together, we will see what we saw we could be. But we will see it as we. And we will see it together. And that's the only way that it can get created, is if we all start seeing the same thing together. Not as, oh, it's already there, but that's what we want to create together. And, you know, there could be scary elements to that, right?